Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. And hey, no virtual background today, but it's all good. We're going to work through some of these technical difficulties, but I am super excited. If you're watching on YouTube, I am super excited because it's not often that you get to have a podcaster on your podcast. And when these opportunities come along, I love taking advantage of them. He is the host of the Causing the Effect podcast, and he's also a comedian. And it's an honor to welcome Scott Gazzoli to the Intentional Encourager podcast. Scott, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing wonderful, brother. Monday morning, I have my coffee. I'm ready to rock and roll. Thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing. I think it's so important, particularly during this time. It's big stuff, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, it's my pleasure. Let's start here. And I've been asking folks for the last 16, 17 months that we've been recording the Intentional Encourager podcast. We started recording at the onset of COVID. And now as we record, there's a new variant. There's the resurgence of uncertainty. You're in the New York City area. Take me through the last 16, 17 months in your world, kind of what that's been like. What's going on now? Because I live in West Virginia. It's totally different than what you're going through up there in New York. But what have the last 15, 16, 17 months looked like for you and your family?
Yeah, man. So I would say that the news hasn't been good for any of us the last 15, 20 years with kind of the division. But I would say for the majority of what you're seeing in Manhattan. So I work in Manhattan, 34th Street across the, next to the Garden. The city's gotten tough, very with the new marijuana laws coming into place, with the cops not really, they're a little nervous on what's going on. Crime has gone up. The streets do not look good. I would say that like the words about what New York City have become are true. Is it, I've been looking at secondary places just to kind of get a break because there's no more cohesiveness between New Yorkers. There's a lot of divisiveness. My sister, I have two sisters that are NYPD cops. So that has obviously not been, when the whole George Floyd thing was going on last year, it was scary. It was scary times. I'm having two sisters that are in the midst of everything. My mother's a nurse. So everything kind of hit me at home. But as far as what I started doing, I kind of enjoyed COVID. I hate to say that, but got an opportunity to kind of do the hybrid working approach model. We figured out what really worked for my company and what didn't. And I would say I really wanted to, when I turned 30, I had this whole goal set up that I want to start a podcast and start comedy on top of my day job, February 2020. Now, unfortunately, COVID started, but fortunately, COVID started. So it gave me a lot of time and opportunity to really figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And starting my podcast, Causing the Effect, was one of the premier purposes of my life. It's really very similar to yours, where the goal is to give people more of a cohesive, expansive, subjective look of what is important in life. And particularly in New York, a lot of people are focused on money and power, particularly in the Western world, right? Men, power, all this stuff. And I'm not saying that's not important. You want to make your money. But as a kid, I spent 6 years in the hedge fund space. I made my money, and that never connected with me. It was never something that was very, that never connected with me. And being able to raise people through my podcast, through comedy, through my day job has been the experience of a lifetime for me. And I realized the biggest thing for me is connection, and being able to be here with you in the moment, helping people or outreaching people is what my life is about. And that's kind of what I've crafted my life to be. I'm very architectural with my life and what I'm doing and spending my time and all this stuff. So it's become great for me. I think the hard part now is the uncertainty. Like, we thought we're done with it. I'll tell you what, New York City's not getting locked down. They try to put a Delta variant onto it. I don't know what's going to happen. I think at this point with COVID, people got to take a little bit of personal responsibility. If you're sick and you don't want to get the vaccination, stay home. Don't be around it. But you can't be locking down people who lost their jobs in hospitality and, all these different sectors that have really been crushed for the last 15, 16 months,
Well, and Scott, I love what you said about connection. And my book, People Buy from People, that I released last year, talks all about that. connection is critically important. People that live in New York City are connected to New York City in a way that most people are not connected to their cities. There is and I was thinking about this the other day. Okay. And let's go here for just a second. Thinking about this. Next month is the 20th anniversary of 9/11.
Yes.
And I was talking to somebody the other day and I said, and I have a son that'll soon be 21. For our generation, for my generation, and I was born in 72. So for the guys like me that are in their late 40s, September 11th was the defining moment of our generation. Okay. I believe that COVID is going to be the defining moment for my son's generation. When they look back and they go, and it's 20 years down the road, and they're having conversations with their kids, they're going to say, let me tell you about the time we went through a global pandemic. Like, to me, that's whereas 9/11 was my generation's, that's the one I've been talking about with my son. COVID will be what he's talking about with his son. I want to get a sense from you about, you mentioned something really interesting, how the city of New York City changed. You live close to Madison Square Garden. Man, I can remember last year when the Big East tournament, the Big East basketball tournament was there. They were playing a game. They got to halftime. And I forget who was playing, but they got to halftime. And all of a sudden they're like, no, we're not coming out for the second half. It was totally shut down. The Knicks were gone, and of course the NBA came back this year. But you guys have the Knicks, you have the Brooklyn Nets as well in the NBA. But the Garden is always where something is happening. There's a connection there. How do you feel as a New Yorker? Let me just go here for a second. How do you feel now about the connection to the city? Because you mentioned it, small businesses have been wiped out. A lot of things you mentioned, taking a break and things like that. Talk me through the connection now, or the disconnection that some New Yorkers might feel around what's been happening. I'm sorry for the long-winded question.
No,
I really wanted to make
it.
sure we dove in.
No, I appreciate that. No, I really haven't been able to talk about my New Yorkerness. And I'm like, just to give everybody a little background, I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. I'm never leaving. I'll never leave Brooklyn. Going to Manhattan every day for the last 10 years, I guess it wears on you. But I would say, like, for example, you brought up 9/11. That was like you said, decisive moment that changed the spectrum of history. It brought everybody in the country together, particularly New Yorkers. What COVID did was split everybody up into this camp or that camp. So going through the situation of COVID, as you walk through the city, there has been sort of lines drawn. And if you work for a big company like American Express, or you've been work for a big company like Goldman Sachs, there's a push and pull going on between the authoritarian people, the people who want everybody to come in, and the kids who are sitting at home saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to come in. There's no need to come in. So I think there's the change. This change was happening. The hybrid working model from New York City. Like, New York City was built on a bunch of rich guys saying, you guys have to come in, work 10 hours a day, come watch. That was never really necessary. This expedited a process that maybe even without COVID would have been there 20, 30 years from now. So this will end up being better, but there's just some type of volatility between what Cuomo's doing, between what de Blasio's doing. I'm not fans of either one of them, that have really separated the situation. Now, as far as the vaccine, there's something else we could, and this is part of the media issue.
Well,
right?
Scott, let me jump in there. Yeah. You just said something really important, because you were talking about, I think, from people that are on the outside that look at New York City, they would say what you're describing. You were talking about coming in, working 10 hours. You've got that hour commute, maybe longer, for people that live in Jersey or people that live in other boroughs that are going back and forth. It's not as glamorous and exciting to somebody that visits and goes, man, there's an energy in this city. There's an excitement. There's a buzz. It's because we're not there day in and day out and not seeing a lot of the same things that you're seeing day in and day out. And what we get a picture of New York City. I can see what you're saying there, and I can picture it because having been to New York City a couple of times, there is a buzz there. If you go there in the middle of the day, there's a buzz, there's an energy, there's an excitement. It feels like there's always something going on, there's always something happening. And what COVID did, to your point, was it was like, all right, everybody go home. Just kill all the buzz in the room. And you know from being a comedian that you need to feed off the energy of a crowd. You need to feed off of that instant feedback in the moment. And it feels like in a lot of ways, New York City is just dying a slow, painful death because of the decisions that have been made, not only by the mayor, but by the governor. Does it feel that way to a native New Yorker?
Absolutely. And like, I never loved the hustle and like, listen, I'm a worker, I'm a hustler. I'm built to make money. Like, I worked in hedge funds for 8 years. I got my CPA, MBA, all these good stuff. But for me, it always felt off going to have to sit in a tin can for an hour a day, sit with 100 people on top of you. And now with this part that we're in of COVID, I think that's why there's even more uncohesiveness, because now there's people on the train that aren't wearing a mask. You got to worry about the new Delta variant. There's just a little bit more scariness. The cops are they're doubling up on the cops coming in and out. So it's been a change, and I do think, you know, the commercial real estate, which New York City was driven on, if you don't need people to go in, you know, those guys are losing tons of money. So you're feeling it also from the top. So my day job, I'm an advisor to ultra high net worth families and celebrities in Manhattan. So that's like my bread and butter, is really dealing with the 1%. I like making money from them. Do I agree with everything they do? But, you know, these people do really control what is going on, and who knows what you know, who knows the real ins and outs of the city. And, you know, most of them left, which that's why you see not a lot of jobs here anymore. And now everything's starting to kind of warm up with the hospitality. Like, restaurants took a beating. Usually a restaurant would get shut down every, you know, 1 out of every 10 restaurants work out in New York City. Now it's 1 out of every 26 or 27. So these are things that, you know, people have to start taking accountability for what's going on for people's life work. Like, imagine, I knew a couple people in the restaurant business that just started, saved up their money, were a sous chef, left everything behind, saved money, started their job, a new restaurant, January 2020, destroyed. There's no way to come back from that. And the more you prolong what's going on, the more tension that we see and that we feel. And there is no more buzz, honestly, in New York City. Like, I'm running around the city at night doing my comedy. I'm in there 4 days a week doing my work. It's just taken a little bit to come back, you know?
Yeah. I got to ask this before we take a quick break. You mentioned a moment ago, you've got 2 sisters that are New York City police officers. Your mom's a first responder, as a nurse, on the front lines. And again, my hat's off to them. Please extend our gratitude for what they do on a day in and day out basis, because being a New York City police officer has been tough the last 15, 16 months. Not that it wasn't already. It's not the glamorous thing that you see on a television show. It's, you know, let's dispel that myth right now. It's not what you see on television. How is that? How have you coped with that, with people that you love dearly, being on the quote, and I'm using air quotes for those listening, being on the front lines of what has been going on with COVID?
It puts it all into perspective, honestly. I would say the women in my life are tougher than I am. Thankfully, like, I was at home during COVID. I'm working from home, doing everything, you know, just phone calls and schmoozing. You don't realize it until you're checking in with them every day. And I would say I've been checking in with both my sisters and my mother more and more than less. Now the COVID situation calmed down, which made me much more safe with my mother. But my sisters are still in the the stuff that they see every day. It's just hey, my sister's name is Sable. I was like, hey, Sable, how'd your week last weekend? You know, we found this dead body who nobody was around this old man for a year. We had to go find the body. And just these things that they go with every day, it puts into perspective, like, let me appreciate the cops even more. And I would say the cops now in New York City are not even, they're being more commonsensical I've ever seen. Like, we're not trying to start trouble. We're not trying to be nitpicky. When COVID was overtook the city, there was nobody driving around. So cops would have to give out more extra tickets for whatever to make money for the city. Now you're seeing cops just take a step. They're taking a step back, but in a good way, where it's like, we're just trying to really focus on the causation of trouble, because these cops don't want to be in the middle of an iPhone, getting videotaped or this or that. They're really, I think, trying to be the best version of themselves with everything going on, which I appreciate. But, being a cop standing on 34th Street next to Macy's, you're getting screamed at by whoever just because you're wearing just because you're wearing the uniform, which is kind of a backwards. I feel like I'm living in a bizarre world sometimes, honestly, with the way they treat the cops.
No, I think that's a great point. And again, if we have law enforcement members listening, thank you for your service, because again, you keep people like us safe day in and day out. And again, Scott, my utmost respect to your sisters and your mom for doing what they've been doing. Let's step aside, take a break. When we come back, we'll get a little bit lighter in the conversation with Scott. We'll talk about his podcast, Causing the Effect. Also talk about comedy. He talked about it just a few minutes ago. Something he's always wanted to do. We'll talk about that. My guest, Scott Gazzoli, host of the Causing the Effect podcast, here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Come back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton here. I want to tell you about our sponsor, SEO National. SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization. Now, what's that, you might say? Well, search engine optimization helps you show up higher on search engines in front of paying customers for words that you as a business owner can monetize. What a great concept. SEO National is owned by my good buddy Damon Burton, who's been a guest here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Not only has Damon and his team worked with businesses of all sizes, from e-commerce startups to NBA teams and Shark Tank featured businesses, but more importantly, Damon and his team are about transparency, trust, and providing lifetime value. So much so that he still has his first customers after opening SEO National 14 years ago. Let me give you some intentional encouragement and call Damon and his team today at 855-736-6285 or go to www.seonational.com and get a free quote.
Scott, let's dive in. You were talking about, and you and I have similar paths with this. I've been told by people for a couple of years, hey, Brian, you got to do a podcast. Just start a podcast. I really didn't know what I wanted to start a podcast about, but March of last year, COVID provided that opportunity for extra time to start a podcast. What was the impetus for you? You had kind of said the same thing. Hey, it was a goal of mine to start a podcast by the time I was 30. What was another impetus for you to do the type of podcast that you wanted to do?
Yeah, this is going to be a long answer, Brian. So buckle in. So
no, man, I'm good, man. I've got drinks next to me.
Good.
I've got a comfy chair, man. I am buckled in, man.
So here's the situation. I would say my life was a series of. There's a lot of different pieces of it, but I have different chapters in my life, and I would say I've been able to get quickly through paths. For example, playing college football. I signed my letter of intent to go to Central Florida. I used to be 260 pounds, strong safety, rock and roll, whatever. And the game before my last game of the season of my high school career, when I signed my letter of intent, I blew out my ACL, MCL, meniscus, completely tore it apart. And I think that was an opportunity for me to kind of do the right thing, get rehab. And, when things get tough, I always kind of shied away from it. I didn't want to do my PT. I didn't want to, when there was a curveball thrown at me, I always ended up kind of just quitting, to be honest with you. This was my teens, in my 20s. Now, I ended up getting a divorce at 28, 29. And if you looked at me on paper, in my mid-20s, I had a $1 million wedding. I was making tons of money. I looked like I was happy. I wasn't at all. And on my 30th birthday, I decided I want to do everything that my consciousness wants me to do, that my inner soul, my inner wisdom is telling me to do. So there was a lot of introspection, a lot of meditation. And I ended up coming up with not only running my day job, because I've accepted Money's a piece that we need. I'm not going to go quit a job where I'm very lucky and very grateful. But there's other pieces that I wanted to express. The connection with my podcast, Cause and the Effect, gives me something of a deeper meaning and purpose in my life. A, to help people that potentially aren't exposed to some of the topics I discuss. That being, what I try to do is give everybody a 360-degree view of just pieces of life. And I would say break it up into your mind, body, and spirit. Your body being fitness, your body being nutrition. So having typical people on, bodybuilders, sports performance specialists, coaches, people that could really tune in on the mind. I've been, since football, always into fitness. That's what I do. I'm a crazy person. I'm up 3:30 in the morning. I have a morning ritual where I'm breaking out. I'm giving time for myself 5 or 6 hours, and that way I can give everything else to other people. The mind piece is more, I would say, psychology, wisdom. I'm bringing neuroscientists on. I'm bringing people on that just expose that part of psychology with why do you think the way you think, and trying to kind of let people stop working on an unconscious path, which I think in today's world is what's going on. You're seeing people kind of just going.
Let me jump in here, okay? Because you had me at football. For those watching at home, I'm revealing my Cincinnati Bengals drink koozie. I am a huge football fan. I went to Marshall when Chad Pennington and Randy Moss and Byron Leftwich and all those guys were there. So I'm you mentioned football. I can go there. I can go there with you. Football does those things you're talking about. If you know, and here's the example. You know, and I'll bring up a guy like Chad Pennington, which you guys got to see in New York for many years as a quarterback of the New York Jets. We saw him here at Marshall, where I went to school. The thing about Chad Pennington was that guy was so smart, even in college. Other teams were playing checkers at times. He was playing chess. He was 6'4". Okay, so he had the body part down. Now at Marshall, still a tad lean. He gets to the NFL, and I got to meet Chad for the first time when he was playing for the Dolphins after he left the Jets. He was all shoulders and all thighs. I mean, the NFL just bulked him up, and so the body part was there. And the spirit, you know, Herm Edwards always talked about Pennington being probably one of the greatest leaders that he had ever been around. Because again, how do you expect guys to let you lead them into battle as the quarterback of the team if your spirit's not there? If you're jogging into the huddle going, all right, guys, coach called a play. I have no idea if it's going to work, but yeah, let's run it anyway. No, you sell that thing. You go, okay, 65 trips right, Z fly on 2. Ready? Come on, let's go. And you call the play with confidence. You break the huddle with confidence. And whether you're under center or in the shotgun, you take the snap with confidence. If your quarterback doesn't have any confidence, you don't want that guy back there because you're going to lose 80-0. He's like, yeah, I'm just going to throw it somewhere. You guys just go get it. I love what you said there. What was one thing you took away from playing football that's helped you as a podcaster?
Oh, I think the consistency for sure, you know, showing up every day and, you know, make it. I think that's where I started to figure out the connection was a big piece for me. Cause you know, you have a team, 50 guys. But like how you were describing that Chad Pennington-ness, right? Like I realized, I would say I was Chad Pennington of my defense. So captain 4 years, all that great stuff that, you know, I was one of those lunatics on the field, but I would say undersized for a linebacker, 6 foot, 230, 240, not athletic, but not the most athletic. But I said I could be smarter than everybody and I could be a leader on defense. So being able to be like a leader and just like, I just knew what it was and I knew what the team needed. I was the guy. I was like, you guys can trust me in every moment. I think it just taught me like an interpersonal relationship as a commodity. Honestly, I was like, wow, people tend to like when I'm putting out there because I'm trustworthy and all this stuff. And this was the beginning of connection, I would say. And that was just the first piece of that connecting to people on a different level. It's like, wow, you could really influence entireties of people without doing much, right? Just showing up, putting your best foot forward, and then being a leader by example. That was it for me. That's as far as that went in the huddle. I was guy calling the plays, all that stuff. But that's exactly what my football career felt like. And when you go through an injury like that, my 350-pound lineman fell on my knee. My knee went like this, the other way. So I could have came back from it. It wouldn't have been easy. I kind of quit. I didn't decided to go to school in New York, being near my mother, being near my family, study hard, accounting, economics, all this good stuff. So it just put me on a different path that was probably better off, but that was always a regret. And that's why I wanted to look at the things in my life where I always wanted to do them. And now I'll never give up my podcast. I'll never give up comedy. These are things that are innately in me that we're just on that journey. And that's something else I realized while doing my podcast and comedy. It's like, it's really about the process is the destination. It's really about the being in the moment with you right now, being in the moment with comedy on stage. Like when you hit those moments, those are when you look back, those are the highest of highs for me.
I've got two questions before we go to break around that. First of all, I love how you describe that, because again, man, those are hard. Being a Bengals fan, watching Joe Burrow get hit in the knee last year, tearing his ACL. It's like, oh man, why? But it happens. Football's a one-play game. I mean, you're one play away from having your career or season ended. If 30-something-year-old Scott could walk into the hospital room and see 18-year-old Scott just haven't had knee surgery on your ACL and MCL, what piece of advice do you think you would have given yourself as you walked into that hospital room? You just had surgery. You're thinking, oh man, this is what advice would you give yourself if you could go back and talk to 18-year-old Scott?
I mean, I would tell him, it's not as bad as you think. These things are the things that will define you. So I used to look at when something bad used to happen to me, I would look at it like the Titanic hitting. And that was the way I handled, I never handled stress or pressure or just the adversity well. Now, when something bad happens to me, people think I'm out of my mind because I'm like, good. Like that is what will make my path harder. So I would tell him that this will be the path that gets you where you want to go. And, I would say, to add to that story, 3 weeks before that, I went to the Brian Urlacher linebacking school camp. So they sent top 150 linebackers from around the world, the United States to New Mexico State. And you're there with, my class was ridiculous. It was Arakpo, Cushing, Clay Matthews. And when you see that going on, like top speed, I could have kept up. But when you see those guys on the juiciest of juices, the Mexican supplements, exploding off the line, it was something else. So I would probably also tell them, like, listen, these guys are all, they're cheating a little bit. You probably should have done a little extra to get there. But it's, I was always comparing myself. And that was something I would say also to young Scott, don't compare yourself. Because nowadays, I don't even think about anybody else in that sense. It's just about being better than the person I was yesterday.
Yeah. I got to ask you this real quick before we take a break. Has there been an aha moment in a conversation that you've had with somebody, or has there been one of those moments that you go, man, this is why I got into podcasting? What have you learned about yourself being a podcaster that you said, man, I didn't realize, because there are unintended benefits to everything. I mean, you just talked about guys that were a step faster, a step more explosive. And you talked about three guys in Brian Arakpo, Brian, I think his first name is Brian Cushing, and Clay Matthews. Yeah, Clay Matthews. And probably Matthews had the most stable of the career of those three guys. Cushing played for a while in Atlanta and kind of flamed out. But Clay Matthews really played a longer period of time at a higher level for the Green Bay Packers. But what did you, in that moment where you're describing it, it's like, okay, this is what these guys have. No wonder they went on to play in college. No wonder they went on to play in the NFL. When you think about podcasting and what you've done in podcasting, what have you learned either about yourself or about podcasting that's gone, oh man, that's brilliant. I didn't realize that would be an unintended benefit.
I mean, there's been so many unintended benefits to my podcast because when you start a podcast, I think people think you're doing it for, you're kind of focusing on I would say I focused on the wrong pieces. You're worrying about making it the best for the audience. You're really worried about the audience, which is great. But for me, the aha moments happen when it's like you sit and have a conversation with somebody for 45 minutes and you come out of it like almost like therapy. And that's the way I look at podcasting now. It's like self-therapy for me because what we're doing is inflecting our thoughts on each other. And then when I inflect a thought on somebody, they give me back in a different way. So I'm always seeing, it's really expanded my mind on another level. Because the reason why I started podcasting was I wanted to get this osmosis that I felt from Jay Shetty's podcast, from Joe Rogan's, of just expanding my mind. And it happens so much more during a podcast that I would tell anybody who's thinking about it. I always do it. My girlfriend does it now, of like, it really is the things that you get out of this as far as these little tidbits of socializing. This is what life is about for me. This is what we all need, right? Human beings need connection. This is something we discussed earlier, but it's such a cool thing that, and then people who are in podcasting, when you don't have that first year under your belt, it's like, I suck. I can't get views. And then if you stay consistent with things, the same thing I learned for football, that was an aha moment. I was like, wow, but football, it's the same stories over and over again. Being consistent, showing up, giving 100%, being prepared, the same things. If you just keep doing that consistently, the results come, man.
Well, everybody believes that you're going to be Joe Rogan and Spotify's going to buy your podcast for $100 million. Those are the 1/10 of 1%.
Yes.
Of people that do it. I would piggyback off of that, Scott. And I would say your end game in podcasting should be the great people you meet from podcasting.
Absolutely.
People that I've had on as guests have become friends. And to me, that's the beautiful part of podcasting is the people that you get to become friends with that go, hey, man, I told somebody you need to be on their podcast, or I told somebody you need to. It's just this beautiful connection and this network of people that are just telling these incredible stories. And I podcast because I feel like somebody's going to hear your story and go, man, I was walking that same path. Maybe somebody's listening to this podcast and goes, man, I was a high school football player too, that had a chance to go play Division I college football. And I got I had the same thing happen to me. I hurt my knee. And it's that connection. It's you don't know them, they don't know you, but man, you're now all of a sudden through a conversation that they hear, they're connected. And I love that, man. That was a beautiful explanation to that.
Thank
so
you.
yeah,
that's really why I do it. And like the deeper meaning, to go a little philosophical here, it's like the Egyptians called it the logos. So the pharaoh was always the person that was the most rational. So if you look at the Egyptian civilizations compared to us, like I said earlier, particularly New York is about money, power, put on the suit. And I live that life. And I'm lucky enough to have made money to go, man, it's nice. And I'm grateful for it, but it's not the answer. I try to take my podcast and focus on rationality with people. So when I have people on, it's people not only that I know are good people, but I know that we could have a connection and we can have an open, honest conversation. So I've learned in the last 2 years from podcasting, the easiest way for me to lift myself is to raise everybody else. So that's, my feedback from kids in New York to, I would say my demographic is 18 to 28. And what I try to do, people say that you need to have a niche in a podcast. And I don't really consider my podcast a niche because it's just me, expression of myself. So I'm into neuroscience, I'm into psychology, I'm into football, I'm into comedy, I'm into a lot of different things. So what's happening is having a bodybuilder fan that's listening to me talk to a Buddhist, getting into meditation to focus on their mind helps them with their bodybuilding. And then a person who's into Buddhism realizes fitness helps them focus more through their meditation. There's a lot of just kind of bouncing things off each other that I think is beautiful, that's going to be needed in today's world, because you're seeing a lot of, like we said, a lot of tension is going on. And this is a weird time in life where there's ancient wisdom from the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita, like whatever. Then you have the modern technology we could use for doing yoga from home. Then you add technology on top of everything. It's an interesting time for everybody's awareness to be raised. And I do think we're going through a renaissance of sorts, that people are going to need these tools to get through all this tension, all this, what is true. You can't just turn on the news anymore, listen to Walter Cronkite and believe it, right? We have to pick. You have to be smarter. You have to be a real critical thinker to understand what is going on in the world. You can't just listen to Fox News anymore. It just doesn't work.
I love that because you're 100% right. Is what's happened is there is a rush to be the first instead of a rush to be right.
Yes.
And so now you're hearing all this information and you're trying to disseminate it in your mind because you think to yourself, okay, who's playing me today? It's, and I'll say this and we'll step aside and go to break. It's almost like a coach, a defensive coordinator. Here's what it's like. A defensive coordinator, the quarterback comes to the line of scrimmage. They've got the play called. And he looks and he sees a 4-3, 2 safeties high. And then so now the quarterback's going through his cadence. Then all of a sudden the safety starts walking up. Mm-hmm. Or the safety starts walking up. And then maybe he was going to, walking up like he's going to blitz. And all of a sudden he drops back at the snap of the ball. Now, everything has changed. What the quarterback thought he was seeing is not what he's seeing at all. And I'll mention this real quick, and I promise we're going to pivot here in just a minute. I was listening to an interview with Joe Burrow. He was talking about a play last year when they played the Colts. And he said, I saw something I hadn't seen before. It looked like the Colts were walking their 2 linebackers up as though they were going to blitz. And then at the last minute, they dropped the linebackers. Mm-hmm. And he said, it threw me because I hadn't seen that before. And he said, I threw a pick in the middle of the field where that linebacker was because going back, he said later on when I watched the film of that game, I went back and went, I could have done this. I could have checked to this play. When I saw these guys walking up, I could have checked at that moment. We had plenty of time on the play clock. I could have checked in that moment to another play that would have been more successful. What's happening is the news media is walking things up and showing you one look while doing something completely different. And we've got to be like a quarterback and go, I'm not falling for that. And that was a great point. I wanted to expound on it just a little bit more. We were talking about football. Those of you that don't like football, you might have tuned out for the last 3 or 4 minutes. Guys like Scott and I that love football, we probably were just, all in it at that moment.
I can do it all day.
Yeah, let's step aside, take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Scott's athletic career. I want to get in more of his life. Scott mentioned going through a divorce. I want to talk to him about his life and his story. Fascinating conversation so far. We've got more of it coming with my guest, Scott Gazzoli, host of the Causing the Effect podcast. You come back here on the Intentional Encourager podcast in just a moment. Hey, everybody, Brian Sexton. Want to tell you about my new book, People Buy From People, 10 Powerful People Lessons from the Ultimate People Person, my dad. My dad was one of the greatest connectors that I ever knew. And he shared with me 10 connecting principles that I have used throughout my 25-year sales and sales management, customer engagement, and leadership career that I'm passing along to you. If you want to be a stronger, deeper, and more powerful connector, you've got to pick up a copy of People Buy From People. There are concepts in there that you may not realize help make you a power connector. You can go to Amazon and pick it up, Kindle if you're an e-reader and you like to do it that way, or now available on Audible. And there's one other way you can get a copy of People Buy From People. You can get one from me and I'll sign it for you. You go to intentionalmediaandpublishing@gmail.com and send me an email, and I'll share with you the link on how you can get a signed copy. You can buy a signed copy directly from me. Again, People Buy From People. If you want to connect like never before, pick up your copy today of People Buy From People. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Scott, let's dive into your life story. You mentioned being a high school athlete. Was athletics something you always did as a kid? Were you a baseball player, basketball player, football? Did you concentrate on football? Take me as far back as you want to take me from point A to where we are now.
Yes, and this story is going to get interesting. I'll tell you right now. So I would say basketball and football were like my two go-tos. I always played baseball too, but basketball and football were like my that's where I signed my letters to high school, played at a very good sports high school. I would say basketball, I was built to be a big man. So I've been 6 foot since 6th grade. So I was 230, 240, building my big man game. Everybody started growing and I didn't. So that was a slight issue. What happened was, and I'll take it before that. Now, people just buckle in here. So this is my childhood, which sounds like a Martin Scorsese movie. So my father was never around as a kid. He was here and there, but from the ages of, let's say, 4 to 8, I spent some time with my father. And, kid from Brooklyn, my dad we had money, we were wealthy. I thought him and his father were in the coffee business. So you would go right over here, over by Brooklyn Bridge, and you'd walk in, there were stacks of coffee cans everywhere. And you were like, wow, business is good. I'm going to just run the coffee business at some point. My father was not selling coffee. He was selling another delicious white treat that got you jacked up, cocaine. So my father ended up getting clipped by the FBI. He went into the witness protection program. And these are things that I found out about 3 years ago from my grandfather, who he actually put in jail. So my father, my grandfather put him in jail. And I would say there was heavy uncertainty as, once my father left, from like 8 to 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. So from there, I would say, cause of the uncertainty, you're looking for, we spoke a lot about connection. That's why I think I connect with males so well. I think I love that camaraderie because I didn't have that. And I do think that's part of why my podcasting is catered a little bit more towards men. I always end up trying to be a big brother or a father figure to people because I didn't have that.
I got to ask you and pull a little more conversation out of that. You mentioned your grandfather. You kind of filled in the gap for you with your dad. How was their relationship with each other? Because you mentioned your father basically, and I'm going to use this term in air quotes, ratting out your grandfather. How was that dynamic like? Was it harder for you? Was it easy for you to go to your grandfather? Was there that grandfather bond? How did that dynamic between him and your dad affect you and your grandfather, or you and your dad?
So I never met my grandfather until 3 years ago when he got out. So he ended up getting out and I never knew what this was going on. And I think no matter what the people in your family tell you or whatever, you still get that daddy didn't want to be around feeling, right? Regardless of the situation. Now, knowing there's witness protection involved, he changed his name, blah, 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 blah. It does give me a little bit of a feeling that's better. But at the same point, I never got along with my father. I would say he was always focused on making money and not really being a dad, he was always focused on the wrong things for me. So I've always lived my life just doing the opposite of what my father does, which is probably weird because a lot of people try to emulate their father. But that's really like the benchmark that I used throughout my life. And then I ended up finding that male camaraderie we have 8 guy cousins between 18 and 42. And we're like a boy band. Like we're the closest. We're super tight. We spend every Sunday together. So that, I think these are like off-puts of not having a father and trying to fill that masculine cup with confidence and with camaraderie, connection, those pieces that I think a lot of people just like, wouldn't know what it's like to have a father. I don't understand it, but I try to fill the pieces of that. Like on that metaphysical level, you need that archetype of who to be and who to act like. Was
athletics your kind of opportunity to make your own name for yourself? Did you feel like that you were going to be like, look, man, I don't have a great relationship with my dad. My dad's non-existent in my life. In fact, my dad is another person, literally, because of going into the witness protection program. I would have to think, and I'm trying to put myself into that situation. I would have to think, and if I'm assuming here, correct me, but I would have to think that a lot of guys in that position go, look, I don't care what my old man did. I'm going to make a name for myself, and I'm going to do things that my dad did, because my dad is not the dude, that fathered me. He may be biologically, but that guy is gone because this new person exists. And I think a lot of times guys especially want to say, look, I want to be my own man. My dad was very involved in my life, but there were a lot of times that I said to myself, I've got to be my own man. I have got to be my own man. No matter what, I've got to be my own man. And I've told my 21-year-old that. I said, look, man, be your own man. I don't care what happens in life, be your own man. Was there ever that moment for you, Scott, where you said, I have got to be my own man, regardless of what happens to my dad, what happens in life? I've got to be my own man.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what began, not my distaste for power and money, but just like realizing that that's not the end all be all, right? So I would say that there's a lot of differences between me and my father that you kind of find out about, but you still have those genes, right? So I would like, what I found in football was to just let a lot of tension out, a lot of anger. After I went through my my injury, I picked up the drums, which is something my father did as a kid. And we had me and all those guy cousins, we formed a band. And that was kind of another pinnacle in life where it was a chance to go on tour, to take the East Coast tour. We were performing in Bowery, all these good places. But my mother said, listen, if you do this, we're going to have an issue with school. So I had to pick between schooling and then kind of taking a shot. And I would say, again, we ended up taking the easier way out and quitting on the band and just going to school and doing the normal stuff. So it just, that's that pattern of always getting very quickly somewhere, but then right when it gets a little difficult, you have to make a hard decision, pulling back. And that was always the theme, the story of my life. So I still am, right? We're all still trying to kind of figure out these waves of what is the truest version of myself to put forward. And that's kind of what, I always looked at it like, oh, well, you have to be a football guy. You have to be a drummer. You have to be a spiritual guy. Now I've realized like, that's what makes me is being the guy who's a fitness enthusiast, a spirituality enthusiast. I love football. I love music. I love all these things. And that's what's so diverse about me and what gives me the confidence to kind of walk through my day and like jump on, I'll have scientists on, I'll have neural brain scientists on. It just gets me going to learn and have that kind of growth mindset,
Well, and again, sports are the ultimate high for a lot of people. Sports just, you have that talent to be able to play. And I didn't play at the level you played. I was a high school baseball player. Yeah, I made the team. I contributed a little bit. That's the story of my life. My son did more in his high school career than I did playing sports. But again, you feel like your worth is in what you're doing. I'm a Division I athlete. I am this or I am that. Take me through that process you were going through, because I don't know what that's like to get recruited to play Division I college football. What was that like for you to go through the recruiting process and go, okay, UCF is the school for me? Because man, they've had some tremendous success in the last 15 years or so in college football. I mean, in this small school in Orlando, Florida, mm-hmm. They have had a lot of success in college football. Was UCF kind of, did it just kind of fall in your lap? Or when they started recruiting you were like, man, it's Orlando. They play some big time football. That's where I want to go. What was that process like for you, Scott?
Yeah, so I would say I was just stuck on Florida for some reason. Party schools. I wanted to be in the in the summer, so I had options for UCF. Gave me the best deal, right? Because I always had my I was one of those kids that was very good on the academic side. So APIB schools, it just sounded good to bring me on because you only had to give me a half scholarship and the other half would have been academics, right? So it was between UCF, which was everything was free, all that good stuff. Then you had Miami, which obviously a different level of schooling there. That would have been like walking on, trying to make the team. Then you had South Florida, which I would say was even tougher at that point, not as tough as Miami. And then the other easy option would have been Rutgers, which that was Coach. I developed a relationship. I don't know, Coach Schiano.
Yeah.
Coach Schiano, obviously, big name. That was kind of one of my mentors.
And now he's back at Rutgers after spending some time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and at Ohio State. Yeah, and for a hot minute was going to be the head coach of the University of Tennessee. And that kind of fell apart. But yeah, Greg Schiano is a name very recognizable to college football fans. Well, so you were talking about Florida, and it would, I think you're exactly right. It would have been easy to go, okay, I can go to Rutgers. I can play an hour or so from home. People that I love can see me play. They play at a high level. Of course, now they're a Big Ten school. Mm-hmm. Central Florida, Miami. What ultimately was it for you that decided where you landed? Because a lot of guys might say, Scott, yeah, I could go to Miami, and man, Miami is the place. I mean, Miami's an ACC school. All these dudes get drafted in the NFL. I mean, they have a litany of guys. I mean, they have Hall of Famers that have gone through the University of Miami. I admire you for really thinking deeply about what was most important for you, because I think a lot of guys in your position would have gone, man, let's just go to the U, baby. Let's just go to the U and let's go there, because if I want to play in the NFL, that's going to be the route that I'm going to go, because they've got all these dudes that play in the NFL. Ultimately, for you, what was it that pushed you over the top to get to select UCF?
When you go to, I'm always the guy who wants to be. I wanted to expose myself to something different, right? You want to put yourself through the uncomfortable positions, but you also wanted to be a little bit of I always felt more comfortable being a bigger fish in the smaller pond. In Miami, at the U, it's a different level of talent. It's just that. So meeting the team, lining up who, for example, I think I was like maybe a 3.5, 4-star recruit, something like that. Everybody on that team was 5 stars. Knowing, I just always liked some of the guys from Central Florida. Dante Culpepper, Brandon Marshall went there for a year before he ended up leaving. And my year was Blake Bortles, and then a linebacker, Kevin Jones. A running back, Kevin Jones. He played on the Lions for a little bit, and we became close with some of those guys. And just the people, I would say, is always kind of what I follow. Not that anything to knock the U. I just think it would have been more competition and more of a struggle to get to where you want to go. Now, in the end, it didn't matter because I ended up blowing out everything anyway, right? Because once you have a significant injury or you have surgery, there's certain clauses that, you don't get guaranteed to get on the team, this and that. So from that point, I had probably like 12 months to decide, like, am I just going to go? This was before, I would say that injury now would probably took 12 months. Back then would have been 15 to 18 months. So I said I would still have to put in this work for 12 months and then work again and then join in sophomore year, redshirt through the whole thing. But I ended up taking the easy way out and saying, it's not worth it. I'll do my PT, see how I felt. And in reality, you're never the same. But for me to say that 3 or 4 months in after a significant injury like that was not fair to me. And, I would, you can get back 85, 90%, probably would have played and all that stuff. But I really do think like, that was just a piece, and this is the way I look at everything that's happened in life. It's just like it was like a chink that I add to my armor now. Like, well, that was that football chapter, and that I needed to go through that so I can get here now today podcasting and have these stories to never quit, to keep going. Because then, podcasting, it's tough. Comedy, I can do football for 30 years. Comedy, when you bomb once, man, it just.
Well, and again too, and again too, I'm thinking as you were talking about that. There was a guy that played at UCF a few years ago, a guy named Mackenzie Milton, who was a quarterback, who had a not that your injury wasn't significant, but he actually tore. I believe he tore something, maybe tore I think he tore an artery as well too, with his knee injury. It was. I remember watching the play, and it's like, man, this is not good at all. And the young man has come back. I think he ended up transferring, did a grad transfer and things like that. But people do not understand, to your point about college football, because we watch it on Saturdays, and one injury in high school changes everything for a kid, because you may be going to Georgia or Alabama or Florida or a big time program, and then you get an injury and they're like, listen, we don't know if you're going to be able to help us or not. We're going to move on to somebody else. It's the reality of Division I, even at the UCF level, the Marshall level where I went to school. Even on that level, they're going, yeah, you know what? We need guys to come in and compete, and we don't know if you're going to be ready to compete. We need to move on to this next guy. For you, I got to ask one more question around that, and I want to move on to another part of our conversation. For you, was that hard for you getting recruited, feeling the love, and then in a moment them going, yeah, we're going to move in another direction? How hard was that for you to process?
It was tough. And I would say you take that and the things I was doing. I was, you're a kid in high school, right? You're always drinking a little bit, but the drinking got up, and you have that sense of, you lose confidence, you lose rejection, you lose your sense of identity, right? And you see this with a lot of people, even, I'm a big UFC fighter. I mean, a big UFC fan. You see these guys who they're so attached to that identity where, I was thinking about this the other day. Like, if I was 22 years old, played football for 5 years, I may have lost myself completely just in that identity, but it hurts. And you kind of find ways to cope with it. I don't have the coping mechanisms now that I did back then of my meditation and my daily ritual. This is like an hour and a half of my mind focus. Then I go to my body. But I think it's for a young person understanding that, it's probably better to learn it sooner rather than later. Because even, you go to the hedge fund industry in New York City. I was always around this type of world. Like, listen, you're kind of, and this is what makes you realize like what's important, right? You're busting your ass every day for people that would drop you in a second, right? So I always put more. I'm one of those people that I tell my guys that work for me, like, listen, we're in this together, but like, remember, it's just a job. Don't kill yourself. Your mental health comes first. But all this stuff that you're seeing come up nowadays. So
you mentioned earlier that you go through a divorce, and that always is a traumatic thing to go through something like that. Take me to, and I'm sure that's part of the post football and things like that.
Yep.
Take me through that next part of your life where you walk that journey. Obviously, where'd you end up going to school, by the way? When you
St. John's. St.
John's a fantastic school. I mean, what a good fallback plan. I mean, to go to a great school like St. John's.
Right. And it's kind of changed everything of like, because what happened was my mother was always against me doing football after I took a bunch of IQ tests that were like perfect scores. So my mother had this in her brain, like he has to be the one who makes money and this and that. So right after football, she was like, you could do it. You're doing it. You bust your butt. Once I hurt myself, she said, okay, what are you going to do when you go? I said, I don't know. I just want to bang girls and drink beer, right? She said, you have three options. You're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or a finance guy. And I just said, well, what was the least amount of years in school I can get out? Finance, 5-year MBA program. I got a double BS economics accounting, got my MBA, and then a minor in philosophy and psychology. So I liked school. I liked the learning piece of it. But, again, you're not thinking about it once you get to 23 and you're going into the city every day, working 12 hours, doing data analysis, doing spreadsheets, blah, 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 blah. It's, going from football to that within a matter of a couple of years. It was like a shock to me. And I think I always knew I wasn't a number person. Like, this is something I always tell my younger cousins who are like, people are looking for what they want to do in life. Like, where do you start? You start with this. People are either catered towards things. A lot of males are catered towards things, tech, devices, technology, whatever. Or some people are catered towards people. I happen to be a person who's catered towards people. That's why we talk about connection. That's why everything I'm doing now is with my voice and with this connection piece. So.
I'm sitting here taking a lot of notes, and the reason I'm doing that is so that, when you get this podcast, you can find out really what this podcast is about. But I want you to take me real quick, and it might be the divorce you went through or things like that. What's the biggest obstacle that you've overcome in life and the lesson that you learned from it?
It was the divorce. And I would say on paper, Like I said earlier, you were looking. If you looked at me, you would say, "Wow, I built a multi-million-dollar home in Brooklyn. I had a beautiful wife. I had everything, but I simply wasn't living the life that I would have architected for myself. To be honest, I was doing what seemed right on paper, right? What seems right for people. It seems get married, make money, blah 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 blah. That path. Once I was on it, I said, "This is not for me." It just wasn't. You can't do. We all have this kind of innate thing, even with the public government you were talking about earlier. Like we just assume that they know what they're doing. I assumed, oh, that seems right. Let me listen to everybody and let me just do what looks right on paper. You have to do, and this is what I would say. People, the biggest thing, you have to do what is in your gut. You have to do what you are meant to do. I'm not saying I'm not meant to be married. I was not meant to be married at that time, right? I always felt in my gut, I want to kind of figure out and expand on these little skill sets of comedy, podcasting, entertaining, whatever you want to call it. When I'm 30, 35 on my own timeline, I'll do what is needed for me. And that's the big thing I see a lot of people doing now. You're just either taking the easy way out or doing what they're supposed to tell you. And that was what my life was basically up till my divorce. So my divorce was definitely the biggest obstacle, but it also came with the biggest reward of being this person that you're seeing today and being able to say, I'm in command of every piece of my life. I wake up at 3:30 in the morning. I have a ton of discipline. I bust my butt, do a half hour of my breath work, an hour into meditation, hit the gym for 3 hours, run a business, then do comedy and podcasting. It is such a vibrant life. And that's something else I never realized. Like once you have your instead of being 120% into football, 120% into school, having 80 to 90% of yourself into 5 or 6 different things gives your life so much vibrancy, so much color, so much neurogenesis going on in my brain, like just learning and just, it's so like I wake up now so excited.
Man, that is so cool. Being involved, being 80 to 90% involved in 5 or 6 things in your life. That's a great key. That's a really good key, because here's the thing. You can have your hands in so many things that you really have your hands in nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's having that focus and that discipline. So man, I love that, Scott. I ask this of every person on this podcast. I'm going to ask it of you. My last question for you. You've been awesome with your time and been so forthcoming. Share your biggest piece of intentional encouragement with this audience.
I would say for anyone who is thinking that, let's say the biggest fear in your life, I call this the dragon. This is the hero's journey. You have to go attack that fear in your life. You have to attack the dragon, because why? The dragon has the gold. There is a reason that you have that fear. There is a piece of you that fear is holding back from you. And by you attacking it, it's going to suck. It's going to be scary. Like for me, I suffered from traumatic stage fright my entire life. That stopped me from doing certain meetings in the hedge fund. That's part of why I did comedy. I worked on this for the last year and a half. There's no more stage fright. It's gone. And when you go up the biggest hill, everything else after that, you're just pushing a ball down. That's it. So everything else from that point of me conquering stage fright has been easier. So go after your biggest fear, attack it, and do whatever that internal voice is telling you to do. You have to go expand that. When you align your external voice with your internal voice, your life will have a ton more synergy.
You reminded me of a story, and I'll share this, and I'll let folks know how they connect with you. You reminded me of a story. And it's not a good memory for me as a Bengals fan. It's the 1988 season. It's the Super Bowl. I forget what number Super Bowl it is. But Joe Montana and the San Francisco 49ers are playing the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals are up 16-13. There's 3.5 minutes on the clock. And they get the ball. The Niners have the ball deep in their own end of the field. I think they were like they may have been like at 17 or 18 yard line. I can't remember the yard line. But here's a story I wanted to mention. You mentioned stage fright and being calm in those moments. Joe Montana looks in the stands. He's in the huddle, and he looks over in the stands and he sees John Candy, the late great comedian. And he goes into the huddle and he goes, "Man, there's John Candy over there. How cool is that?" They're down 3. It's the last drive of the game, 3.5 minutes left. in the biggest game of the year, which the Super Bowl is for the NFL, and Montana goes, there's John Candy. He's so calm, cool, and collected in that moment. It's why they called him Cool Joe. In that moment, there was no stage fright. He was like, how cool is that? There's John Candy. And Montana takes the 49ers down the field. They score. Game's over. They win a championship. It's being cool in those moments that you understand what you're really made of. And I love that what you just shared there about attacking the fear. Because in those moments, as you know, as a football player, your shorts get tight. There are a lot of guys that their shorts would get tight, like, holy crap, we're down 3 and I got to take us down the field in the Super Bowl. And Montana's looking around like, all right, let's just go down and score. Man, I love that. And it reminded me of that staying cool in the moment and attacking the fear. I love that encouragement. Scott, tell folks how they can connect with you, find the Causing the Effect podcast. How do folks connect with you?
Absolutely. You could reach out on the website, causingtheeffectpodcast.com. The email is causingtheeffectpodcast@gmail.com. Instagram, same thing, Causing the Effect Podcast. Type in Causing the Effect Podcast. You'll find me. Any questions, anything. I love connecting with my fans. I love connecting with the people who just need help. And a lot of them are younger teens that just need a little bit of guidance. Like I think we all do. And I've made enough mistakes to kind of, figure it out for them. So more than happy to do that. Feel free to reach out anytime. We'll text, we'll hook up. Anything to help people. That's what I'm here for. So
Scott Gazzoli, man, this has been fabulous, dude. And I'm so glad that we got to collaborate on this podcast. And man, what a great conversation we had. I'm really looking forward to being on your podcast. And man, I don't know if I'm going to bring the thunder like you brought the thunder today, man. But
you will, man. You will.
You have brought the thunder today. Scott Gazzoli, thank you so much for joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Thank you, Brian.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.